Good morning again. So this panel will talk about the potential benefits of a decentralized model for cell and gene or ATMP manufacturing. We would like to make this as interactive as possible, and I would ask the audience not only to ask questions, at the end we reserve some time for that, but also do a raise of hands. And I have two questions for you. The first question would be, raise your hand if you believe in some sort of a decentralized model would add benefit and you will believe in that. Please raise your hand if you believe so. It's pretty good. So there's 30–40% of the audience believe that decentralized models could actually be beneficial. Second question, do you have a clear idea of how that will look like and how it will evolve into the future? Do you really understand what it takes and what that would look like and when it will be applicable? Close to zero. That's why we're here, right?
That's why we're here. Mm-hmm.
So this is the purpose of this panel, to have an active discussion about how that could look like, what it would take, what are the hurdles, does it even make sense? And this is where we have a team of innovators who will have, I think, a very good discussion, sometimes even controversial, very different aspects. And just let me add to that, if we talk about decentralized, just to be clear, we define decentralized as not being one central facility, but closer to the patients. How that could look like, whether that is a hub, point of care. Let's exclude the bedside vision for now, because we believe it's maybe too much of a hurdle to get there. But some way closer to the patient we define as decentralized. So my name is Palmacci. I grew up actually very close to here, only 2 kilometers away behind the hills. So I'm actually really thrilled that now the decision was made to bring the meeting on the Med to Rome, to my hometown. It's a great pleasure that is happening. I spent most of my time in big pharma companies like Bayer, Novartis, and I'm now, since 2022, part of the executive committee of Lonza, where I am the president of the Cell and Gene division, which encompasses mainly 3 aspects. One is the classic CDMO business. We have the products, but we also have the cocoon, which in the relevance of this panel is partnering right now with Galapagos, where we have a model in place that indeed provides a point-of-care model where we partner and we look into actively partner with Galapagos on several clinical programs. With that being said, I would like to introduce the panel. Why don't we go ahead and give a brief overview of yourself and the company you work for. Chris, go ahead, please.
Okay, so I'm Chris Vann. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Autolus. Autolus is preparing to launch its first autologous CAR T-cell product towards the end of the year for acute adult acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We've chosen for this product and for our initial launch to have a centralized approach, and we have just secured the manufacturing authorization from the MHRA for our facility in Stevenage.
Carol, go ahead.
My name is Carol Houts. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Germfree Laboratories. I've been in the industry 30+ years now. I've stopped counting. And come from a varied background, working in regulatory, quality, compliance, and spent a significant time actually working in clinical research, running CROs for a while. That's been giving me a unique perspective in thinking about how we get manufacturing closer to the patient, and Germfree's made some really significant steps in that direction. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fabian, Gerlinghaus, co-founder and CEO of Cellares. Cellares is the world's first integrated development manufacturing organization, or IDMO for short. The key differentiator between an IDMO and a conventional CDMO is a 10x improvement in productivity, meaning for ex vivo cell therapies, we can produce 10 times as many cell therapies with the same facility size and the same number of people. We focus on clinical as well as commercial scale cell therapy manufacturing. And really the way we achieve this is through technology integration and vertical integration. On the technology integration front, we've invented, designed, built, and tested one of the most advanced cell therapy manufacturing platforms on the planet. It's called the Cell Shuttle. It's fully automated, high throughput, closed. And we're not a tools vendor. Rather, in terms of vertical integration, we now proceed to deploying and operating Cell Shuttle technology in IDMO smart factories around the world, predominantly in the US right now, but we're rapidly expanding to Europe and Asia as well.
Thank you. Jason, go ahead.
Daniel. Jason Foster, CEO of Ori Biotech. Ori is an enabling technology company really helping on a mission to enable widespread patient access to life-saving cell and gene therapies. So Ori has developed and is launching actually at ISCT in a few weeks, a closed automated platform to manufacture cell therapies that is both flexible enough to do research and development on, but also scalable enough to do commercial manufacturing. So solving some of the translational challenges that we've had as an industry. As a company, we're point of manufacturer agnostic. We can help manufacturers who are manufacturing centrally. We can also help implement digitally powered, automated, decentralized models to bring manufacturing closer to the patient and help solve some of the access challenges, which I'm sure we'll be covering in more detail today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So let's start setting the scene a little bit with the first question that I think what is triggering the fact that we're sitting here? So, or in other words, what are the limitations of today's models? What is worthwhile to resolving? And maybe we hear the voice of the customer first. Chris, why don't you go ahead and describe what the challenges are and what we are trying to resolve?
So I think one thing to start off with is that we talk decentralized and centralized, but there's a high degree of commonality whichever way you go. You're likely to be using the same machines to make the product. You're likely to be needing to train operators to a very high level because this is very difficult. Don't let anyone kid you, this is complex manufacturing. So that's why the bedside analogy really doesn't apply. You have to also ensure the quality of the product is consistently made. It requires, according to current regulatory standards, to be made in a very specific space in a very specific way. So, for example, the flow of people has to be in one side, out the other. The product comes in one side, out the other. Separate handling for waste. So there's all kinds of rules around both the manufacture and the release. I think when you look at it, and we can unpack this in a minute, the appeal, I think, of decentralized manufacture is that you don't have the logistics step, that it's actually close to the patient in terms of therefore reducing some time, and we can discuss the significance of that. And I think there's an appeal to actually potentially have it more networked and integrated inside the hospital. But that does pose some problems, and certainly as a manufacturer, I think Galapagos being maybe one of the exceptions, in most cases, the tools providers actually will still leave the responsibility for the final integrity for the product with the manufacturer, the indemnity and other things. So when we look at this, you know, what we're trading off is we're trading off some of the logistics and temporal advantages of a decentralized approach versus some of the centralized ability, if you like, to actually have greater control, have more scalability, and also to some extent, I would call it almost more redundancy in people and processes, because if you have a central factory, you can actually train a workforce, and if you think about it, if someone's off sick or someone leaves the company, you can potentially be less susceptible to that. I think that, you know, what we also have to say, though, is in all aspects of our business, the technology is moving on, and as things come in, such as a greater degree of automation, less product handling, I think that some of the considerations, the balance of them may actually change. So we also foresee that there could be in future, for example, be what I would call decentralized manufacturing, which would be lots of smaller units spread across the world. Where I kind of struggle, given that I mentioned the indemnity, where I kind of struggle is handing the responsibility of the product over to the hospitals where I may not have so much control over the consistency and quality of the product. Not because the hospitals don't have great people, but you have an advantage if you're the manufacturer of actually having everyone trained and controlled to high GMP standards in a very consistent way if you actually take responsibility for that yourself.
Oh, Carol, maybe you want to add a little bit of flavor. If we put ourselves in the shoes of the patients and the healthcare providers, what is their biggest struggle, and how could some sort of a decentral model help to address those main concerns? What do you think?
No, thank you for the question. I mean, honestly, let's face it, these therapies are just too expensive for most to have access today. And also from a logistics perspective, patients can't necessarily always travel to centers that are centers of excellence in cell and gene therapies. So we have to look at some alternatives. And I think for this moment in time, we're innovating at every level. And that's honestly what it's going to take to be able to deploy this model. And that innovation is in our quality management systems, it's in our regulatory framework, it's in how we deploy infrastructure and resources. The tools providers have a massive play here in how they develop technology to reduce the complexity in workflows. And we know that all of that's going to be required to deploy a decentralized model. It's complicated, but I think there's a lot of innovation that's happening right now that'll ultimately result in a process that will work. There will be no model that's perfect. I mean, there will be several that exist in a commercial framework.
If we ask the tools providers, do you believe that's what we are trying to resolve? What is the core problem for the healthcare providers and the patients? What is your perspective on that?
Well, I'll start by saying that most of what we do at Cellares is ultimately driven by the needs and desires of our customers. What we're hearing from some of our large pharma commercial stage customers is you do need to have a decentralized model in the sense that you have centralized facilities on every continent. More than 50% of transatlantic flights are delayed, so it's very, very difficult to manufacture in the US for patients in Europe or patients in Asia for that matter, just because of the logistics of flights involved. So that drives that customer interest, and ultimately patient interest drives a certain level of decentralization that we're supporting. Beyond that, I really don't see the benefit. It's no secret, I've made this point many times. I'm not a believer in bedside manufacturing because of release testing. That's still a very involved FDA-regulated process, not the core competency of nurses and doctors. And then beyond that, I think a lot of times what people are solving for when they're thinking decentralized manufacturing is hopefully a shorter turnaround time and less logistical challenges. And I don't really see either, because shorter turnaround times, you really won't get those, because you'll still need to freeze the product at the end of the manufacturing process, even in the decentralized model, because of release testing. Release testing takes a certain amount of time. And then the other, I think, potential benefit that I think is real and is not really real and elusive is lower logistical challenges. We've certainly run those models and looked at, would it be beneficial to build a network of a bunch of small facilities rather than one big centralized facility? And you really just shift the problem. Instead of, maybe you have less challenges collecting apheresis and infusing product, you simplify that logistical chain, but then you take on so many additional logistical challenges in terms of each of these little facilities now has to make not just one type of cell therapy, but dozens. They're all supposed to infuse, Yescarta and Kymriah and all of the others. And now you got to solve the logistical challenge of how do you get all the materials, all the viral vector for these different cell and gene therapies to dozens, if not hundreds, of very small manufacturing sites that are decentralized. And that logistical complexity far outweighs the logistical complexity of shipping, apheresis, and final frozen products within the continent.
Jason, do you want to add some flavor to what the problem is?
Sure. I mean, I think there's nothing, it's not a binary yes, no, centralized, decentralized. There's shades of gray between which will enable value in different ways for different types of therapies, different types of setups. I mean, people who are intelligent and thinking about this issue disagree on whether the benefits are economic or time-based or both. I just saw a report come out from ZS this week that estimated a 75% reduction in costs for a decentralized model versus centralized. Now, none of us know how they got there, but the people who are thinking critically about this are seeing value. And I think ultimately, the way I see this playing out is the issues of site of manufacture and technology are intertwined. I think we all have to admit that today, it's impossible to do decentralized manufacturing with the technologies we have and the paper-based processes we use. That just is not feasible. And you even have manufacturers who have multiple sites, maybe on the west and the east and west coast of the US, struggling to demonstrate replicability of that process and that product at 2 different sites that they fully control. So there are hurdles to overcome. Technologies that are evolving and coming out like Ori's will certainly help and enable this to happen. But those 2 things have to be interlinked. And I think the industry is overlooking some of the complexity of what this is going to take to get done. I mean, just an example, we recently, for the last kind of year and a half, we've been working with the Center for Cell Therapy Manufacturing down in Houston. So CTMC is a joint venture between National Resilience and MD Anderson, most of you will know. Working with them on an internal program at MD Anderson, CD19 CAR program. As part of that program, we decided together as a team to try and demonstrate the feasibility of doing multi-site manufacturing. So we took the same materials, we split them between 2 different sites. We tech transferred the process on our technology from Houston to Philadelphia. In 2 weeks' time, we ran the same process in 2 different places, 6 batches, 3 at each site. We demonstrated comparability. We sent all of that output back to do analytics at MD Anderson. All 6 batches met their CQAs, met their release criteria for their clinical product. This is a phase 1/2 program. It can be done. I think the constraints are regulatory. The constraints in some ways are logistical, quality. The question that always comes up is how do we batch release in a multi-site or kind of distributed model? But ultimately, for me, if the industry wants to do it, if it's good for patients and the regulator wants to do it, that we can overcome those barriers and deliver value for patients.
Thank you. I think summarizing the value for patients is the focus, and what is it? And we touched on a few points, right? One is clearly logistics, so faster turnaround, which clearly is also in line with what we're working on, as I mentioned, with Galapagos, where the vein-to-vein days can be significantly reduced. We're actually from 30 days down to 6 days. So that's part of a clear challenge that we're having is how much time, what is the logistics coming in our way in order to provide the curative effort for the patients. That's one. I think cost is probably another big topic that is ultimately also limiting accessibility for patients and the whole logistics around it. So let's touch on that and think about what would be a viable model to resolve those issues and how would it look like? Carol, why don't you give a little bit of flavor what you envision could be a viable model and what it would look like?
Yeah, no, it's a loaded question. I honestly think there's some teams that are really innovating in this at this moment. And I think those teams are really taking everything we know today, the regulatory framework that exists. I mean, I myself used to oversee as a head of quality numerous CDMOs where I released product that was manufactured around the world. So we know that the regulations, we know that infrastructure is in place, so we can borrow from that framework that we've been working in for many decades. Teams like Caring Cross on the nonprofit side of things are working with countries around the world, academic centers that are key centers of excellence to develop some of this decentralized model, focusing on cost and simplifying workflows. We're privileged to be working with them on this, and I think the beauty of it is sometime next year we may actually have some data we can report and really provide some lessons learned. There are other groups. We know that Orgenesis has done a lot of work in this space. They haven't published very much, so hopefully we can encourage them to get more of their information out there about some of the lessons that they've learned. I think we need to innovate at an iterative level. We owe it to patients to start to move and advance this. Decentralized is here today. We know that hospitals are producing these therapies now. So how can we support them with a decentralized model? In the United States, we will absolutely have hospitals that hold their own BLAs. They will be networking with other hospitals to decentralize their therapies so that they can give patients better access and they can reduce costs. And some of that will take partnering with payers. We know the need to actually satisfy in the US, Medicaid and Medicare. In Europe, certainly here under the social systems, that's going to be a driver behind decentralized, behind innovating on workflows, behind actually distributing infrastructure. These are some of the things that we're working on today, and we are just going to continue to report out on how we're doing and keep innovating over time.
Mr. Voice of the Customer, what is your perspective?
I mean, firstly, let's talk about some of the aspects about the logistics and getting product to patients. We work with a product that's used for adult ALL, which is probably the worst of the worst because you're getting product with 95% blasts. The idea that a decentralized manufacturing would take any more or less time than a centralized manufacturing I struggle with, because the reality is the growing time is 2 to 6 days, depending on which manufacturing process you're using. I think the biggest issue, if you're going to get down to 6 days, is the quality release. And that's where I think, you know, you talked about regulators. I think this is where there is work to be done, because things like bacterial testing release could be applied to all products and would certainly reduce the time back to the patients, but they should be applicable on a common regulatory standard for all manufacturers. I think one of the things we also just should say is the logistics is particularly important for something like ALL because you've got a rapidly advancing disease. But I just want to put it into context. We learn all the time, and whenever we build a facility, we look at what went right and what went wrong previously. So a product coming to us takes approximately 1 day, and what was mentioned is 50% of the time you don't actually get the product on time. For us, it's substantially less because, you know, there's 6 airports in the London region. We have multiple routes to every hospital we work with. But I think that the key thing is if you're a central manufacturing company, you will actually take that 1 day extra. We do that because we also have some pre-processing steps. We want that done under the control of ourselves to prepare the product to be as best product, you know, highest quality apheresis in, best product out. I think on the back end of this, though, we mentioned the release, and one aspect that we're able to do that I don't think has been fully explored yet, and is one of those improvements, is we actually are setting up a depot model, particularly for the US. So we actually ship the product while it's actually undergoing final release. So the tail end of this, we may actually find our product actually as close as if it was actually manufactured on a local basis. So, you know, I think whichever way you go, there are substantial improvements happening all of the time, and that's what we need. And one other comment I think is really important. The cost of goods has an element that is fixed, which is the materials, the manpower, reagents and things that are used in the product. But the standards you put around that, so the need for qualification, the need for managing and basically taking the cost for our spec products, the cost of the REMS, the cost of the quality systems which need to be maintained and validated. If you apply the similar costs And you don't say, well, this is sunk in the hospital portion of the, yeah, it doesn't matter with this type of product because the hospital's already paid for the operator. I don't think you come out, and that's why I'm going to go and have a look at the ZS paper. You know, I don't think you come out with something that is so wildly different on a cost of goods basis. If you apply the same regulatory standards, if you apply actually the same infrastructure that you need to commercialize the product.
Fabian is eager to contribute to what is it really that is driving and reducing costs. I'm pretty sure you have something in mind that you want to share.
Yeah, I do agree that, like I said before, I think from a cost perspective, decentralized manufacturing and centralized manufacturing is a wash. I do think we need centralized manufacturing facilities in each of the continents and manufacture at least locally within the continent to mitigate transatlantic flights. You mentioned certain costs are fixed, like labor. I think that's actually where we hope to be making a contribution. We can reduce or have reduced the amount of human labor required to make a cell therapy by about 90%. And that's one of the ways in which we're able to produce about 10 times more cell therapies than a conventional CDMO using the same number of employees. I think one other point that I wanted to make regarding speed, turnaround time, I think we're kind of hearing agreement on the panel. It's probably a wash, decentralized versus centralized manufacturing. What is not a wash is, let's say you're a US-based biotech or pharma. You just got the nod from the FDA and you're not commercial in the US. Okay, you know that if the FDA approved it, it's very, very likely you're going to get approval in Europe, possibly in Japan. How quickly can you expand to those other markets? And what that typically takes, that decision to invest in new facilities is made by the biotech or the pharma company only post-regulatory approval. So what we're doing as a contract manufacturing partner is we're building out those facilities ahead of time, and that dramatically speeds up the time to global expansion and serving markets in the US and Japan for our customers. And it certainly helps a great deal that the technology that we've built has a very high degree of automation. So, you know, tech transferring from the US to a facility in Europe or Asia happens at the speed of software. You know, as quickly as you can copy over a database entry that defines your cell manufacturing process, Cell Shuttle in Europe or Cell Shuttle in Asia will do the same thing that it did in the US. So that de-risks tech transfer. It makes it faster. It makes it cheaper. We use the same quality management system across the board, which helps a great deal with site-to-site comparability. But ultimately, the net benefit to our customers is what we productized as a globalization package. If we've got your process on our platform in the US, we can export your process and run the exact same process in a European or an Asian facility very, very quickly, virtually instantaneously. So I think that's going to be a tremendous benefit to the industry moving forward.
So what you're saying is the ability to have a platform that provides full automation then also not only helps with the logistics on the day-to-day, but as you expand your manufacturing site, you can replicate it in the different regions. We will touch a little bit more on that when it comes down to regulations, but I want to hear, Jason, as well, how you see it and what's your perspective on the benefits?
I mean, I think the real answer is we don't know yet because no one's really applying a system. I mean, just Daniel, you sort of said it in an offhanded comment, but if Galapagos has cut a 30-day turnaround time, vein-to-vein time to 7, something's working in what they're doing. You know, and patients are safe, hopefully, and they're getting an effective treatment. So there are lessons to learn there, and we'll learn them as we move forward. You know, I agree with Fabian's point around and reinforcing my own that technology is embedded in this discussion. We cannot have this discussion without talking about platform technologies that are going to deliver replicable processes across different sites, different continents, you know, all those things. And we've demonstrated the value of that at Ori so far. I might take the discussion just from the other angle to say, because none of us really know yet exactly how this is going to unfold and what the relative benefits are or not, what if we didn't do it? if we take it sort of from the other perspective to say, like, let's just say, okay, we're all very happy with centralized manufacturing, let's leave it how it is. I think you already see hospitals around the world creating their own products to address the need to get products that they can't access for their patients. And so as an industry and as people who care about the safety of patients, that's a little bit of a scary future in that, how are those entities regulated? Are they safe and effective for patients? We need to look at it. The market will decide. The market will find a way to create access if we don't do it in a safe and effective and regulated way, in a high quality way. So I think, looking at the converse, looking at the other side of the coin, I think most recently in the last couple of weeks, there was a hospital in Brazil that was quoted saying they're going to make their own CAR T products. They quoted a number, I think it was around $40,000 per patient. I know in Israel, there's a hospital doing it there. In Barcelona, there's a case study there. The numbers are somewhat fuzzy. Sometimes they're only direct costs. Sometimes not. They get vector for free. But I think we all agree that there is a need to reduce costs. There's a need to improve access. That may include bringing manufacturing closer to the patient, that we can see benefits that are already being enjoyed by, CellPoint and others. So it's up to us as a community to work together to solve this problem and to say, distribute is one of the arrows in our quiver to say maybe, that could be additive as we look at a network approach. And we mentioned this earlier that different indications, different size indications, different urgency potentially. If you have a late stage cancer patient, an extra day or two could matter for that patient. That could be the difference between life and death. If we're talking about maybe autoimmune disease or other diseases where you've got a bit more time, then a different model might apply there. So I think flexibility and open-mindedness to the possibilities is important, but the underlying kind of takeaway for me is that technology is required, digitization is required to be able to replicate safe and effective product manufacturing in lots of different locations and geographies.
Thank you, Jason. I think it also reflects, you shared the white paper with me, which they're from ZS, where they're really adamant decentralized model can significantly reduce costs, and also they call it the indigenous CAR T accessibility in countries like Brazil, where it contributes massively to give accessibility in countries where they would typically not have the ability to have those therapies applied, and where decentralized model could actually significantly help. How? We are all speculating, we're not getting there, but it's also depending of what kind of therapy we're looking at. And maybe because you're probably more of an expert, where do you see the different kind of therapies, because it's not one size fits it all, more being applicable to a centralized, decentralized model? When we talk about autoimmune, when we talk about oncology, what do you think is more applicable and what is less?
Thank you. So firstly, let me correct just one potential misunderstanding from what I said, because I didn't say it maybe clearly enough. When we look at our model, when we look at our manufacturing model, whether we deploy a centralized or a decentralized process, and we could probably do both, because the way we made our manufacturing facility was actually modular, so we could take a module and place it somewhere else. The biggest single factor is scale. The more that you automate, standardize, and add volume, the more that you will reduce the cost of goods. I think the second thing, and then I'll talk about the different indications we're engaged in. I think the second thing is when you hear 40,000 versus 90,000 versus 150,000, we're going to have to get into a game where we actually have a clear set of standards which apply to all, and we're going to have to cost our products according to a similar regulatory framework that gives the patients a product of equal quality, so then we can assess the value, because there are also very distinct differences between products for that particular indication. When I look at the way that I think the world is going, and everyone, I'm part of Atmps, so I find it great fun to talk about rare diseases, because everyone can agree on that. It's great, the exceptional patients, we can all agree that we can find a way for those patients. I think my colleague Dilip, when he was sitting on the panel, made the point. We're going to be talking soon about indications of thousands of people. And then I think that this issue of decentralized or centralized may become a moot point, because we're going to need to have more facilities in more regions to actually fulfill the need that we're talking about. And you know, autoimmune indications is a classic. You know, the beauty about autoimmune indications, lots of patients, you can afford to, whether it's a smaller decentralized factory or whatever, you can afford to place that closer to the patients. I think the other nice thing about where we're going with indications, the sensitivities about turnaround times, the starting doses are going to be much lower. I think there's going to be many things that we can actually apply to the business model, which for me is actually more likely to make that a more regionally dispersed manufacturing than something like an ALL product, which is difficult to produce because the starting material is so poor, and you do have to be very fast to the point that you actually need to speed up the days back to the patient. That's, by the way, why it's important we also come up with consistent release standards for things like sterility tests, so we can get it back to the patients earlier. So I do think that the bigger scale products are going to take us closer to the patients just by scale, and scale will actually drive the cost of goods down, as it has with, I was previously at Roche with antibodies, as it has with all other modalities when you actually modality matures and becomes standard of care.
Well, thank you, Chris. Let's shift gear maybe and look about legislation, regulatory aspects, and liability. It's fair to say the agencies are interested, so both the FDA and also the EU has a proposal for an amendment for pharmaceutical legislation, where they're actually pointing out an opportunity to use a hub and then use comparability for the different satellites, so to speak. It's not done yet, but there's clearly an interest in taking the decentralized model seriously and think about how this could be regulated. So how do you see those aspects of liability, training of the personnel, who is ultimately releasing the product? What are some of those aspects that you would say are debatable and a vision where this could lead to? Fabian, probably you have some clear ideas about that you want to share?
Yeah, I think there's a point to be made about technology's role when it comes to standardizing the manufacturing process as well as release testing. The FDA, as you mentioned, just came out with new guidance for advanced manufacturing technology designation. And in our view, that's very much a push for standardizing cell therapy manufacturing processes. You know, I've made this point time and time again. There is so much process development work redone and redone over and over again. It's kind of pointless and non-value add in biotech labs across the world. To maybe make it very concrete, process optimization for white blood cell enrichment on your particular centrifuge doesn't add value. Those are unit operations that should and need to get standardized so that ultimately we speed up process development, we reduce the amount of regulatory review that the FDA has to go through every time that they review a BLA or an IND application. So there's one point. The second point I think I want to make is decentralization and what are the regulatory hurdles here. I think before we even get to regulatory hurdles, a big one is what does the customer want? And I think you said it well, ultimately it's all about scale. Jason, you pointed out there's a few hospitals that are having press releases come out that they made their own cell therapy, but at what scale? It's a one-off here and maybe a few patients there, but ultimately who's going to have scale? It's going to be the pharma companies and large biotech. And what do they want? They want to have their cell therapies manufactured in the lowest number of sites, and ideally, they want only their own cell therapy manufactured in that site. They don't necessarily want the competitors' products manufactured in the same site. So I think also if you then think about it at that scale and you're trying to make 10,000, 40,000, 100,000 doses of a particular cell therapy, that easily fills out an entire building. So I think at Cellares, what all of that accumulates in for us is we're increasingly going to be in the business of building and operating dedicated cell therapy manufacturing facilities for individual clients as a service.
Can I comment on the regulatory side? The question, we did a bit of analysis around sort of the MHRA guidance versus the FDA guidance. The FDA had done a kind of distributed manufacturing workshop, and I think it's now 2 years ago, November. And there's some stark differences between the perspectives of the different regulatory bodies. So being able to harmonize that and standard, I mean, even the definition as you set it up at the beginning, point of care versus bedside versus decentralized isn't shared across the two regulators. So just give you one specific example. The guidance that came out of the FDA suggested that a piece of manufacturing technology that was used in a hospital would be classed as a point of care device and have to go through the medical device approval pathway. If it was made across the street in a different building, the same exact product, the same exact process, it would be classed as manufacturing equipment and through a totally different manufacturing regulatory pathway, which clearly doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think there's some work to be done on, as we said, the regulator I think has an interest in this, but all the regulatory bodies, certainly in Europe and the US, we need harmonization across what we mean. How do we regulate? The big question that always comes up in these discussions is batch release. How do we do that in a quality way? How do we do QA? Can we do that centrally in a hub and spoke model? Then do we have to have QC locally? And that sounds complicated. Some of this discussion really is constrained by the existing frameworks. The existing way they think about this. I disagree with Fabian's point partially in that it's not only going to be big pharma companies that have large infrastructure that's going to need to manufacture these things. We have, I don't know what the latest ARM number is, 600 companies out there doing clinical trials in this space. There's going to be lots of small biotechs that have a single product or a couple products that don't have a huge infrastructure and need an alternative method to bring their products to market. So this idea of multi-site, multi-product patient, or multi-product manufacturing is an alternative that needs to be explored. It's not just the 4 big guys manufacturing CAR-Ts that we need to think about. We need to think about the other 590 that might bring innovative medicines to market. But that kind of quality and regulatory hurdle is a large one for us to overcome in the short term before we think about this seriously.
Carol, you're an expert in setting up satellite clean rooms, so to speak. And what do you think about those aspects that we have touched on regarding regulatory and what it takes and liability as well, maybe about the release, just thinking that through?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So Germfree launched a platform, 2015, mostly for the healthcare space. And in that time, we deployed well over 100 different clean rooms for GMP and USP 797 and 800. We learned a lot during that phase, and there's a few things that became critically important. Each unit had to be identical, and that was identical from the layout perspective of the facility, from how the equipment was laid out in the facility, the training, the standards by which every site operated from had to be identical, and I think, or comparable. I forget. I had an FDA person correct me on that recently, and it was pretty funny. So ultimately, identical training on every site has to be the same. And on the regulatory perspective, we've spent a lot of time lately talking with the FDA about how they see this in the future. I think they're very engaged, as everyone has said on the panel, and it gives us a great opportunity. And I think the way they're seeing this is that a BLA holder is ultimately going to be the responsible party, irregardless if it's manufactured in a central way or in a decentralized model. That's kind of what they're telling us that the view of this is going to be. And then the satellite sites may have an establishment license, similar to how the CDMO space is working today. And they've even gone as far as to think about how sites would be added. Let's say I've got 10 sites today. I'm in a commercial product. How do I add 5 more to expand my reach? I might even be able to do that through an annual report mechanism. So I'm adding sites as I go. They will use a risk-based approach for inspections, and that's how they would manage it. So I think the FDA is certainly getting more clarity about how this model will work. They know it's coming, and they know that if they don't get a framework down, that who knows what might happen. We all have lived through the stem cell days and what that looked like. But overall, I'd say that we need to lean into that and bring all regulators and all parties and stakeholders to the table and advance this forward. And I think everyone wants to do that for the benefit of patients.
Excellent. So before we go into questions, I really would like to reserve some time, and I hope that the audience is really eager to go a little deeper. Why don't we do an exercise? Let's just go, every single one of you, provide a vision how the world would look like in regards to a potential decentralized model, adding the benefit in 3, 5, and 20 years from now. How would you see that? Jason, why don't you start?
Gave me the easy one. Okay, good. I mean, 3 years away, I can't see a massive difference from where we are today. I mean, I'm very interested in the results of CellPoint Galapagos' efforts to think about that and how it might shed some light on where we need to head. But I think certainly where we will be 3 years from now is a much more standardized, much more automated, much more replicable set of processes that have the opportunity to then be spread to multiple locations. So I think that is an obvious win that we can do in the near term. I'll take the other end of the spectrum just to try and kind of synthesize the thought to say in 10 years' time, one of the models that's been suggested to me, which I think is super interesting, and it's very far from where we are today, is essentially the BLA holder, the pharmaceutical company, becomes the recipe provider. So they say, this is the recipe for our cell therapy. Maybe there's key ingredients like viral vector or other things that they provide, but potentially they outsource the manufacturing to others, utilizing standardized technology, standardized methods. And this could make a lot of sense. They're investing, all of those companies reinventing the wheel and investing in duplicative infrastructure. I mean, 150,000 square foot manufacturing facility is going to cost $100 to $150 million to build. Why does every single company need that? They don't. And so is there an alternative model to say, actually, the infrastructure is shared in some way, and we leverage technology to deliver products, either closer to the patient or in a more centralized fashion? I think that kind of model will evolve because every company that's in this space spending, $500 million on 3 facilities in 3 different continents, it just doesn't really make sense.
Thank you. Fabian, what's your vision?
Yeah. We've put a lot of thought into what is really required from a technology perspective to win in this space and to create a cell therapy manufacturing standard. So it's my firm belief that ultimately what we've created with the cell shuttle is going to be that manufacturing standard for the cell therapy industry moving forward. We're about to prove that out in the clinic within the next 12 months, and then we anticipate being in commercial scale manufacturing as early as 2026. So I believe that within 5 to 10 years, really the technology that we've created is going to emerge as the de facto standard for cell therapy manufacturing, and a large percentage of cell therapies that are actually administered into patients in the world will be made by us.
Thank you. Carol, why don't you go ahead?
So I'd say in the next 3 years, I think you're going to see countries like Brazil finding some success in producing therapies for their people in their country. And we're going to know soon what that looks like. And I think that cost driver is going to be really important. I think you're going to see that divide between how we tackle things in biotech and how hospitals provide these therapies to patients is going to be a bit stronger. I think that there's going to be innovation on both sides, and understanding how the healthcare delivery process is going to work is going to be really important. I really I'm aligned with Jason and what the future might look like in 10, 15 years, where hospitals might be providing these therapies in almost like a recipe perspective. If you think about it today, pharmaceuticals are compounded in hospitals all over the world, and there's a recipe from pharmaceutical companies that provide that for them. Chemotherapy agents, radiopharmaceuticals, we know that we're already in that space today, so the model is there. So maybe that's something where we could be in that period of time. And I think the innovation is just going to be essential to get to that point.
Chris, you're a visionary.
So firstly, I think that the scaling and the need for access will actually drive a decentralization from with more centers being set up. I think if you're going to go closer and closer to the patient, it becomes even more important to have standardization, a degree of central control, which adds complexity, and that we're going to need to have a degree of automation, because the one thing that isn't standard in the world is people. So I think the technology does not exist today. So I'll give you the vision when people show me the technology that's going to allow for that type of manufacture in a way that's controlled and consistent. So I think that's the burden. What I hope does not happen and should not happen is that we get basically a separation of standards. So we end up with cut price products which satisfy a political desire just to have given an option to patients versus a consistent standard, high quality, latest technology type product. Because I think, where we want to go to is a situation where we make constant improvements over the current treatments and the way we deliver them, not basically get stuck in 2010 with whatever technology we have and then find the cheapest way to deliver it. And I think that there is a little bit of a concern that we may get caught in that second bucket if we don't engage the governments on what really matters, which is let's find a sustainable approach that allows market access for as many patients as possible to the most advanced therapies.
Well, thank you. We have some time left. Let's get the magic cube out, and please go ahead with the first questions.
Mike, apparently Jancy didn't want you to have the first question. Stephen gets
Sorry,
the
Mike,
con.
I've got my hands on it too. Thank you. Brilliant topic. Fantastic, educated panel in this topic area. Thank you. So Stephen Ward from the Cell and Gene Catapult. Lots of things really resonating in the discussion. There are fundamentals which I think everyone was talking about. Real automation, real digital, which is going to allow a sort of a decentralized journey, however then far you want to collapse, if you like, that sort of model that we've got. The one thing, though, which to my mind seems to be a bit of a challenge at the moment is this testing element. We're still testing at the end. We really don't have integrated testing. Even if we start to talk about in-process control, etc., we're still really, I think, lagging behind in that area. It's great, Ori, Fabian, others got all these great technology stacks coming through. You're going to need that even if you're in a sort of an ultra-high density regional environment, or if you're going to collapse it and push it further closer to the patient. But we're still doing pharmacopoeial testing. There's got to be a way that we can, perhaps in a more pre-competitive way, pool some data. How are we looking at stability? Is that really competitive advantage for us all? Tether that to some pharmacopoeial tests with some, big data banks, which is then sort of proving that these, various surrogate tests we might want to use are really safe and applicable. And to my mind, that's something that we're perhaps not moving on. Seeing digital move, we're seeing automation move, but analytics is perhaps the bit that's just lagging behind. Thank you for a great panel.
Thank you. Who wants to take it?
Yeah, I'll jump on this one and take a first step. We see the very same thing that you're pointing to. We've got a cell therapy manufacturing bottleneck that's been discussed in great length over the recent years. And then we also have a QC bottleneck for release testing. So we saw the same challenge at Cellares, and actually later this month, we're launching our second flagship product, which is a fully automated platform for QC, both in-process QC as well as release testing. And I'll leave it at that with a teaser, more information to come out within a month.
Carol, you want to add something?
The way we're looking at this is that you really need QC co-located, or at least very close by in a regional place. And we are behind on the innovation and QC side of things. I do think there's some good work that's been done, but there's a lot more that's needed to do. I think Cellares has done some good work in this area, but there's much more. And it is a significant bottleneck. I'd agree.
Yeah, just to confirm, when we looked at this again, when you look to save time vein to vein, this is the biggest chunk of opportunity, because we're doing tests that, frankly, might pick up a non-threatening, microbe where you have to give an antibiotic, and we may be delaying patients days to actually receive the product. So this is an area I think that needs to be a focus for the industry. I agree with Steve.
Thank you. Let's make sure we can get another question, please.
For that excellent panel. It's Mike Palmacci from ARM. So you've all obviously thought about this a lot, and I have to say you've reinforced some of my doubts today about, with respect to cost, should we really expect decentralized manufacturing to be less expensive? Time to manufacture. There are some logistical benefits, but it sounds like there may be some logistical challenges as well. But I wonder if one possible benefit is, for an autologous CAR T, the ability to be more nimble with respect to local demand and sort of avoid the situation that we have right now where patients can't get the product because there isn't a manufacturing slot. What do you think about that idea, or do you have other thoughts about other potential benefits that weren't discussed earlier?
I'll take that one if you don't mind. I think the potential benefits are clinical, so there's this debate about fresh versus frozen and whether there's benefit there. There's benefits potentially around flexibility. I would argue there's benefits around timing, flexible use of capacity. One of the things that we hear very commonly from the players that are commercializing products today, a lot of companies don't yet have that real world experience, but a lot of the navigation of logistics, the scheduling, the inbound patient material misses a slot and they have to rejigger their processes, causing a lot of pain in the industry. So this idea of being able to flexibly address the needs of a more local population, my thought is that a product or starting material that gets on a plane is always going to be harder to deal with than one that goes into the basement of the hospital or across the street. It's just natural to think that way. And we'll prove it out. But I think these models are evolving, and we need to explore them fully and take the steps forward to do them, to explore them, to pilot them, to trial them, and see the potential benefits that could be envisioned.
Excellent. We have time for maybe one more question before we
Could
wrap
I
it
just
up.
maybe give a comment on that? I think there's improvements here. There's actually a cell orchestration platform. There's now center engagement IT coming. This is also an area that's improved. I think one of the things we've learned is obviously patients don't come along in buses, nice and even. They come in batches. So I think anyone who's setting up a manufacturing facility today will have what I call headroom, because you have to have it, because if it doesn't arrive on a Friday but arrives on a Saturday, you've got to process the product when it comes in. Now, so again, I think we've got to be careful that we don't actually over-talk up issues that are, like all of the other issues in the space, being addressed. We ran our clinical trial during COVID when the air freight was actually down to something like 9% of normal levels. We still managed to run a study effectively. So let's put that into context, that even at 10% of air traffic in the world, it's still possible, but you have to develop the systems in that area just like any other area of manufacturing.
Let's try to squeeze the last question in before we run out.
Thanks a lot. This was a really great discussion. As the sole representative of Galapagos, I did feel a little bit like the elephant in the room here, but it was definitely nice to hear. So it's just some thoughts from me personally. I think in the end, decentralized manufacturing is a quality model. All the tools, whether it's automated manufacturing or automated analytics, they are just elements that serve that quality model. So everything that you do in decentralized manufacturing needs to serve that model. And another thing that I thought about, and I didn't hear that a lot about these past days, is one stakeholder is also the physician. Decentralized manufacturing empowers the physician. You can imagine being a physician, having 10 patients in a week, and you need to pick one, because you need to call for a manufacturing slot, and you will not get them all. So you need to pick your patient. that's where decentralized manufacturing really gives power back to the physician, where they just can talk to the colleagues and say, you have time in 2 weeks. And that's the future that we envision with this decentralized manufacturing. So I wanted to conclude with some of these thoughts. Thanks.
Well, it's more conclusion than a question, I guess, but I think it's an excellent one. I think, thank you very much for adding that additional flavor. Very interesting thought and very truthful. So I would like to wrap it up. I think clear learning is one size doesn't fit it all. I think it's also obvious that we haven't found the holy grail that resolves accessibility to patients. We have these wonderful therapies, but one of the job that we all have to do, and I can only invite to collaborate all of us, is to make it accessible to patients. And there's a lot that is still out there. There's a lot that it takes. When we talk about, we saw earlier at the conference, the pain that a very young patient, a child, had to go through Orbi with, which was symbolized by the beads and symbolizing the different treatments and different interactions that that poor little kid had to go through. It's our job to make the world better, to make it accessible to patients, and to significantly improve the ability to take those therapies, bring them all the way to the patients, and collaborate on making this happen. I can only invite all of us to collaborate on that. I think we can make this world significantly better, and I think that's what we're here for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And see you around. Thank you.
Thank you.